The sun was beating down unbearably through my living room windows. Farmington turned into a little hell in the summer. The heat was so intense that even the cacti in my garden seemed to be begging for a drop of water. I sat in my old rocking chair, looking at the yellowed photos on the shelf. 11 years. 11 long years since the day my husband Garrett was found dead in his car at the bottom of the canyon. I ran my fingers over the old frame of our wedding photo. Back then, it seemed like we had a lifetime ahead of us. Now, at 65, I felt only the emptiness and loneliness that had become my constant companions. The phone rang sharply and unpleasantly. I knew who it was even before I looked at the screen. "Yes, Caden," I answered, not hiding the fatigue in my voice. "Merritt, you haven't answered my texts again. Have you taken your medication?" My brother's voice sounded like it always did, a mixture of irritation and feigned concern. "I'm not a child, Caden. I'm 65 years old, and I'm perfectly capable of remembering my medication." "But you're acting like a child. Last week you forgot to come to your doctor's appointment. Douglas called me personally." I sighed. It was a familiar conversation. After Garrett's death, Caden took over as my caretaker. At first I was grateful for his concern, but I quickly realized that he wasn't helping me cope with my grief. He was controlling me. I had a rough day at school. 28 years of teaching chemistry don't go unnoticed. I just forgot. "You've been retired for 3 years, Merritt. Stop using school as an excuse." I didn't answer. What could I say? Caden thought I was a half-crazy old woman who couldn't handle her own life. Maybe he was right about something. After Garrett's death, everything fell apart. Our son Leighton accused me of not noticing his father's depression. "You saw that he was suffering, Mom. How could you just ignore it?" he yelled at me after the funeral. Then he married Sinead, and we only saw each other at formal family gatherings, where the atmosphere was so tense you could cut with a knife. "Are you even listening to me?" Caden's voice brought me back to reality. "Yes, of course," I replied, although I hadn't really been listening to his latest tirade. "Sinead and I think you should consider a nursing home. A good one, with care and companionship." I gripped the phone tightly. "No, I'm not going to a nursing home. This is my home, and I'm not going anywhere." "Merritt, be reasonable. You live alone. Your son sees you once a month if he's lucky. What if you fall? What if—" I said no, Caden. My voice was hard. "Thank you for your concern, but I can handle this on my own." I hung up the phone, knowing he would call back in 15 minutes, outraged at my recklessness. But I needed this short respite. The room was quiet, with only an old clock ticking on the wall, a gift from Garrett for our 30th anniversary. I remembered his smile when he handed me the box. "So we'll always know how much time we have for each other," he said. The irony was that we didn't have as much time as we thought. The photo albums filled almost the entire shelf, our lives archived in chronological order. I took one of the last ones, the one of Leighton graduating from university. In the photo, the three of us, me, Garrett, and our son, are smiling and happy. It was 2 years before Garrett died. Back then, Leighton still looked at me with love, not bitterness and disappointment. I remember the day I found out about Garrett's death. A policeman knocked on our door at 3 in the morning. His face was serious and gloomy. He said that Garrett's car was found at the bottom of a canyon, smashed to pieces. The body was so mangled that identification was possible only through dental records and personal belongings. "Suicide," they said. He deliberately drove off into the canyon. I couldn't believe it. My Garrett, always so cheerful, so optimistic, how could he? But the evidence was overwhelming. A note found in his office. "I'm sorry, Merritt, I can't go on any longer." Just 9 words, written in his handwriting. 9 words that ruined my life. Leighton blamed me. He said I was too busy with my career, my students, my hobbies, that I didn't notice how his father was suffering. At first I tried to explain, to justify myself, but eventually I just gave up. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was too blind to see the obvious. After the funeral, Leighton distanced himself from me. He moved to Albuquerque, found a job in an IT company, and married Sinead. They rarely came to visit, and when they did, the atmosphere was cold and tense. Sinead never hid her attitude towards me. "You know, Leighton needed a mother who was actually present in his life," she told me once when we were alone in the kitchen. He told me how you always put school first, even when his father needed you the most. I didn't answer then. What could I say? That Garrett never told me he was suffering? That he always smiled and supported my career? That he was proud of me when I won the Teacher of the Year award? No one would have believed me. In their eyes, I was a selfish woman who had overlooked her husband's depression and, in fact, led to his suicide. The phone rang again. This time it was not Caden, but Leighton. My heart always skipped a beat when he called. It happened so rarely. Hi, Leighton. I tried to sound calm, even though I was shaking inside. Mom, his voice was strained. Uncle Caden just called me. He says you're refusing help again. I took a deep breath. Of course Caden had called him. He always did when he wanted to pressure me. I'm not refusing help, Leighton. I just don't want to move into a nursing home. This is my home. Every corner of this place reminds me of your father. That's the problem, Mom. His voice grew colder. You're living with the ghosts of the past. Dad's been gone for 11 years, and you're still clinging to this house, to these memories. It's not healthy. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Clinging to memories? I was just trying not to forget. Not to forget what Garrett was like, what our life was like before that fateful day. Your father loved this house, I answered quietly. Dad's gone, Mom. Leighton's voice rose. He's gone, and you can't go on living like he's just going to the store and will be back soon. I pursed my lips to keep from saying something I would regret later. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. Leighton, I want to propose something to you. Let's go somewhere together, you and me. Just the two of us. There was silence on the other end of the line. What? He finally asked, clearly confused. A trip, maybe for a week. I was thinking of Oregon. You always wanted to see the Pacific, remember? When Leighton was 13, he was obsessed with the ocean. He read every book he could find about marine life and dreamed of becoming a marine biologist. That dream disappeared in high school when he discovered computers, but his love of the ocean remained. Mom, I can't just take a vacation and go away. I have a job, commitments. Please, Leighton. I didn't want to beg, but I felt like this might be my last chance. Portland. We can see the ocean, try the local food, just spend time together, like we used to. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing into the phone, probably thinking about what I'd said. I don't know, Mom. Sinead can join us if she wants to, I offered, though the thought didn't make me happy at all. No, she's busy with her new project, he answered quickly, and I couldn't help but feel relieved. Look, I'll think about it, okay? I need to check my schedule, talk to my boss. This was more than I expected. Sure, think about it. It's just, Leighton, I think we need to do this. Both of us. Maybe you're right, he suddenly agreed, and for the first time in a long time, I heard something like warmth in his voice. I'll call you back tomorrow, okay? Sure, I'll be waiting. After we said goodbye, I sat looking at the phone in my hands. This conversation was the most positive one we had had in the last few years. Maybe all is not lost. Maybe we can be a family again. I walked to the window and looked out at the dry land of New Mexico stretching to the horizon. Farmington had been my home for 30 years, but now it felt like a prison of memories, accusations, and loneliness. Oregon. Green, fresh, with an endless ocean. A new beginning. A place where neither Leighton nor I would have to remember Garrett. A place where maybe we could finally talk, really talk, for the first time in 11 years. I picked up my old laptop and started looking up information about Portland. Hotels, restaurants, attractions. I didn't know if Leighton would agree, but I had to be prepared. The phone rang again. This time it was Sinead. I took a deep breath before answering. Hi, Sinead. Merritt. Her voice was cold as always. Leighton just told me about your idea. A trip to Oregon? Yes, I thought it would be a good opportunity for Leighton and I to spend time together. And you didn't think to ask me first? She sounded indignant. 8 years. And you're still trying to make decisions for him without consulting me. Sinead, I'm not trying to make decisions for him. I'm just offering him a trip. He's a grown man, and he can decide for himself. You know he can't refuse you, she continued. You're using his guilt to manipulate him. It's not fair. Guilt? If anyone had guilt in our family, it was me, not Leighton. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone, Sinead. I just want to spend time with my son. Is that so strange? You're always complicated, Merritt, she sighed. You don't think about how it affects Leighton, me, our plans. I closed my eyes, trying not to let my anger get the better of me. 8 years, and Sinead still saw me as the enemy, as an obstacle to their happiness. 1 week in 11 years. I don't think it's too much to ask. We were planning to go to my parents' house this month, she said, ignoring my words. But now Leighton says he can't because he has to go with you. Do you realize what you're doing? I didn't know about your plans, I answered honestly. We can reschedule our trip if we need to. Typical, she snorted. You always find a way to make yourself a victim. Fine, go on your trip, but don't expect it to change anything. Some wounds are too deep to be healed by a single trip. With that, she hung up without waiting for my response. I sat looking at the wall. Sinead never hid her dislike for me, but today her words seemed particularly cruel. Some wounds are too deep. Maybe she was right. Perhaps 11 years of separation cannot be overcome in 1 week. But I had to try. For Leighton's sake, for my own sake, for Garrett's memory. I couldn't continue to live in this vicious circle of pain and mutual blame. Something had to change. My phone vibrated. A message from Leighton. I checked my calendar. I can take a vacation from the 15th to the 22nd. Does that work for you? My heart leapt. He said yes. Despite Sinead, despite his busy schedule, despite everything that had happened between us, he agreed to go with me. I quickly typed back, yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Leighton. It means a lot to me. His response came almost instantly. Don't make a big deal out of it, okay? It's just a trip. Typical of Leighton to back off as soon as I showed too much enthusiasm. But it didn't matter. He agreed, and it was the first step towards something new, towards possible healing. I looked at the picture of Garrett on the shelf. I'm trying, baby, I whispered. I'm trying to fix what's broken. The days before my departure were filled with worries and preparations. My suitcase stood open in the middle of my bedroom, and I couldn't decide what to take and what to leave. The weather forecast for Portland predicted rain, which is typical for Oregon, even in summer. I packed 2 sweaters, a raincoat, and an umbrella, wondering if it was too much for a July trip. But after 11 years of living in sun-baked Farmington, where rain was a rarity, I was afraid of being unprepared. My eyes rested on the photo album on the night table. I hesitated whether to take it or not. On the one hand, it was too heavy and took up a lot of space. On the other hand, it contained photos of Leighton as a child, those happy moments that I hoped to recall during our trip. Perhaps by looking at these pictures together, we could recover at least some of what we had lost. In the end, I put the album in my suitcase, covering it with a sweater. If Leighton saw it, he might get angry, thinking I was trying to manipulate his feelings again, as Sinead had said. But I couldn't help but take it with me. He was my talisman, my hope. The phone rang just as I was putting my medication in my small travel bag. I immediately recognized the melody, Caden. 3 days had passed since we last spoke, and I even began to hope that he would leave me alone at least until I left. Caden, I'm really busy right now, I said instead of greeting him. Busy packing for this stupid trip? He sounded openly judgmental. I sighed, putting down the pills. Yes, I'm leaving tomorrow, and it's not a stupid trip. And you think 1 week in Portland is going to change anything? He snorted. After 11 years, you're wasting your money, Merritt. And not just your money, but your energy. At your age. At my age, what? I interrupted him. I'm supposed to stay home and wait to die? Is that what you're saying? Don't be so dramatic. I'm just saying that you should be more careful with your money. Your pension is only enough to cover the basics, and these tickets, hotel, restaurants, you're spending savings that could be used for unexpected medical expenses. My savings, my money. But Caden always talked about it like it was his. Like I was a child, incapable of managing my own finances. I'm not going to discuss my financial decisions with you. My voice turned cold. I weighed the pros and cons and decided this trip was worth the cost. You've always been selfish. Caden's voice turned razor sharp. Always thinking only of yourself. Even with Garrett, you... Don't you dare, I hissed, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers turned white. Don't you dare talk about Garrett like you knew him better than I. He was my husband for 33 years. 33 years, Caden, and I knew him better than anyone else. And yet you didn't see that he was so unhappy that he decided to kill himself. The words hit me like a slap in the face. It was the most painful reproach Caden could have given me, and he knew it. 11 years later, and he was still using Garrett's suicide as a weapon against me. We're done talking, I said, barely holding back my tears. But I had already hung up the phone. My hands were shaking and there was a lump in my throat. After all these years, the pain was still as sharp as a fresh wound. At the time, I didn't see the signs. I didn't realize how deeply Garrett was suffering, and that will always be my burden. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm down. I can't let Leighton see me like this tomorrow. He already thinks I'm emotionally unstable. Thanks to Sinead for that. Opening my nightstand drawer, I pulled out an old photo of Garrett that I had always kept there. It was one of the last photos I took, taken a month before he died. We were at a neighbor's barbecue, and someone took a picture of Garrett laughing at something the host said. His eyes were shining. The wrinkles in the corners of his eyes deepened with laughter. He looked happy. Why didn't you talk to me? I whispered to the photo, as I had done hundreds of times before. Why didn't you tell me you were in so much pain? But as always, there was no answer. Only a silent smile from the glossy paper. I carefully put the photo back in the drawer. Tomorrow is a new day. Tomorrow I will see Leighton, and we will try to restore what was lost. It was a fragile hope, but the only one I had. The rest of the evening was spent in hustle and bustle. I checked the tickets at least 10 times, afraid of mixing up something. I prepared my clothes for tomorrow, set the alarm for 5 in the morning, even though I knew I was unlikely to sleep. Finally, when all the preparations were completed, I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling and listening to the clock tick away. The inexorable countdown. The night passed in a half-sleep, half-delirium. I dreamed of Garrett, as I often did. In the dream we were younger, Leighton was still a baby, and we were driving somewhere in a car, laughing and singing together. Then the road would suddenly cut off, and the car would fall into the darkness, and I would wake up screaming, unable to remember if I had managed to grab Leighton's hand. I woke up long before my alarm clock, sweaty and broken. The sun hadn't risen yet, but there was no point in going back to sleep. Instead, I got up, took a long shower, and drank a cup of strong coffee, watching the dawn paint the desert in pink and gold. It was my last morning in Farmington before I left, and part of me felt strangely homesick at the thought of leaving, however temporary. Leighton arrived at 6:30 sharp, as promised. I watched from the window as he parked his car in front of the house, neatly, methodically, just like his father. He didn't get out of the car right away, and for a moment I thought he had changed his mind, that he was going to turn around and drive away. But then the door opened and he stepped out, tall and slender, looking so much like Garrett that my heart sank. "Good morning, Mom," he said when I opened the door. His voice was neutral, but not cold. Progress. "Good morning, Leighton. Come in. I'm almost ready." He entered the house, looking around as if he were seeing it for the first time. "You've repainted the living room," he noticed. "Yes, last year. Blue. Calming." He nodded but didn't say anything. I took my suitcase and we went outside. The morning was cool, but I knew that by noon the heat would be unbearable. Another reason to be excited about going to Oregon is to escape this hellish summer heat. The drive to the Albuquerque airport took about 3 hours. For the first half hour, we were driving in silence. I looked out the window, watching the desert change from the red rocks of Farmington to the flatter landscapes of southern New Mexico. Leighton was staring at the road, switching radio stations from time to time, but not finding anything he liked. "How's work going?" I finally asked, unable to take the silence any longer. "Fine," he replied. "Lots of projects. Right now we're developing a new security system for banking software." "Sounds complicated." "Not really if you know what you're doing." He shrugged, but I noticed a hint of pride in his voice. "I always knew you'd be successful," I said quietly. "You've always been so smart, even as a child." Do you remember when you took apart a radio when you were 7 years old? Your father was thrilled, even though he tried to look stern, when you laid all the parts all over the living room. The corner of Leighton's mouth twitched up in a small smile. Yeah, I remember. Dad said I was either going to be a brilliant engineer or a first-rate destroyer, and he was right. I smiled, grateful for this moment of shared memories. Dad was often right, Leighton added quietly, his face turning serious again. The mention of Garrett brought tension again, and the conversation stopped. But at least we were talking. At least we were trying. We stopped at a gas station about an hour later. While Leighton was filling up the car, I went into the store to buy water and a snack for the road. When I came back, I saw Leighton talking on the phone, leaning on the car. His face was tense and his voice was harsh, even though he was trying to keep his voice low. No, Sinead, I'm not canceling the trip. We're already on our way, he said. Yes, I know your mom was counting on us. No, I can't just leave my mom at the airport. Listen, it's only a week. 1 week. We can visit your parents next month. No, it's not the same. I moved a little farther away, pretending to look at something in the store window so I wouldn't eavesdrop. But even from a distance, it was obvious that the conversation was not going well. When Leighton finally finished talking and gestured to me, his face was grim. Is everything okay? I asked cautiously as I got into the car. Yeah, he replied briefly. It's just Sinead is worried. I nodded, not daring to ask more. We started driving again, and the silence was heavier this time. But gradually, with each mile, the tension began to ease. Leighton turned on the radio, finding a station that played classic rock, the music Garrett loved. Whether it was a conscious choice or just a coincidence, I didn't know, but when Hotel California came on, I couldn't help but smile. Your father loved that song, I said. I know, Leighton replied. He always sang along when it came on the radio, even though he sang terribly. We both laughed, and it was like the first ray of sunshine after a long winter. He sang terribly, but with such passion, I added. Do you remember how we used to joke that the neighbors would sue us because of his morning concerts? Yeah, and Dad always said that his talent was just unrecognized. Leighton smiled as he remembered. He said that one day the Eagles would invite him on tour, and that we'd be sorry we laughed at him when he became famous, I finished, feeling something warm spread through my chest. It had been so long ago, laughing together at memories of Garrett instead of feeling only pain. We arrived at the Albuquerque airport 2 hours before our flight, as planned. Leighton parked in the long-term parking lot, and we walked to the terminal with our suitcases. It was strange to be at an airport again. I hadn't flown since Garrett and I went to Florida for our 25th wedding anniversary. Are you okay, Mom? Leighton asked, noticing me hesitate at the entrance. Yeah, I just remembered something, I replied, forcing myself to keep walking. Registration went smoothly, although I was a little nervous about the modern self-service system. Leighton patiently explained each step to me, not showing irritation when I made a mistake. Another small sign of warming between us. After we passed security, we had more than an hour before boarding. Leighton suggested we find a cafe and have breakfast, and I agreed, suddenly feeling hungry. We sat down in a small cafe overlooking the runway. I ordered tea and oatmeal, and Leighton ordered coffee and bacon and eggs. When our orders arrived, I noticed that he was stirring the sugar in his coffee exactly like Garrett 3.5 turns of the spoon, no more, no less. What? He asked, catching my eye. Nothing. I shook my head. It's just, you look so much like your father sometimes. I expected that mention to create tension again, but Leighton just looked thoughtfully at his coffee. Sinead says that too, he finally replied. She says I inherited his stubbornness. And his kindness, I added quietly. And his sense of humor, though you try to hide it. Leighton looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, a softness, maybe even a vulnerability. You know, I often think about him, he said, turning the cup around in his hands, about what he would say about my life, my work. He would be very proud, Leighton, I replied, barely holding back my tears. More than you can imagine. He nodded, his eyes downcast. Then, as if suddenly realizing how open he had been, He straightened up and started talking about our plans in Portland, what places we would visit, what restaurants we would try. The moment of openness had passed, but something had changed between us. Something fragile but real. When boarding was announced for our flight, we packed our bags and headed for the gate. The line was moving slowly, and I involuntarily watched the other passengers. Young couples, families with children, businessmen with laptops. They were all in a hurry, each with a story to tell. Do you think Dad would have liked Portland? Leighton suddenly asked as we slowly made our way to the exit. The question took me by surprise. I think so, I answered after a short thought. He would have loved the ocean and the forests and microbreweries. You know how much he loved trying different kinds of beer. Yeah, Leighton smiled. He always said that beer reflects the soul of a town, and that Farmington has the soul of an old, tired cowboy, I added, remembering a favorite Garrett joke. We both laughed, and for a moment, just a brief moment, it seemed as if the past had never happened, as if there had never been this terrible rift between us, as if we were just mother and son remembering a loving husband and father together. But then the line moved and we approached the counter, where a friendly woman checked our tickets and boarding passes. Have a nice flight, she wished us, and we went into the sleeve leading to the airplane. As I entered the plane, I felt a strange excitement. Not fear of flying, but something else. The feeling that we were really doing this, really trying to change something. And although I knew that a week was not a long time, that one trip could not fix 11 years of pain and alienation, I felt hopeful. Fragile, tentative, but hope nonetheless. We took our seats, me by the window, Leighton in the aisle. He helped me place my carry-on bag on the overhead bin and made sure my seatbelt was fastened correctly before fastening his own. Aren't you afraid of flying? He asked, noticing me clutching the armrests as the plane began to pull onto the runway. No, I'm not, I replied. It's the first time in a very long time. You'll be fine, he said, and there was a confidence in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. And although he was talking about pilots in an airplane, I felt that his words had another meaning. Maybe it was just because I wanted to believe it. The plane started to run, and I felt us pressed against the seats. Then we lifted off the ground and we were going up, leaving New Mexico, its deserts, mountains, and memories behind. At least for a while. I looked out the window at the land that was moving away and felt something inside me rise as well hope for reconciliation, for healing, for a new beginning. Perhaps Oregon, with its green forests, ocean, and rain, will indeed be a place for us to start over. Leighton took out a book and started reading. I looked at his profile. So much like Garrett, but still different. My son, my greatest joy and my greatest pain. I didn't know what this week in Portland would bring, but for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope for the best. The plane cut through the clouds smoothly, heading west. I stared out the window at the fluffy white blanket below, occasionally glancing over at Leighton. He was deep in a book, some kind of technical novel about artificial intelligence, judging by the cover. I didn't want to disturb him, knowing how rarely he gets the chance to just sit and read. His job as an IT specialist, he said, rarely left him time for pleasure. A flight attendant was rolling a beverage cart down the aisle, offering passengers water, juice, or coffee. When she got to us, Leighton looked up from his book and ordered coffee for himself and tea for me without asking what I wanted. He just knew. This small gesture impressed me more than it should have. The realization that despite all the years of estrangement, he still remembered such details. Thank you, I said as the flight attendant handed me the hot drink. Leighton nodded without looking up from his book. But when I looked at him again a few minutes later, he was no longer reading. His eyes were focused on something or someone at the front of the cabin. Is something wrong? I asked. He did not answer. His face took on a strange expression, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and fear. I followed the direction of his gaze, but from my window seat I couldn't see what had caught his attention. Leighton? I touched his arm, and he flinched as if awakened from a trance. I'm sorry, what? He blinked, turning his gaze back to me. You look like you've seen a ghost, I said, trying to sound light. but his expression didn't change. I think, he trailed off, leaning closer to me and lowering his voice to a whisper. Mom, I think I saw Dad. What do you mean? I whispered back, feeling a chill run down my spine. Over there in business class. He nodded toward the front of the plane. A man. He looks just like Dad. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was impossible. It was just a resemblance that struck Leighton. Leighton, your father died 11 years ago, I said, trying to sound reasonable and calm. It can't be him. I know, he nodded, but his eyes were still wide with shock. I know it sounds crazy, but Mom, this man is his copy. The same features, the same expression when he smiles, even the same gesture when he adjusts his glasses. I could have sworn. It's a coincidence, I interrupted him, feeling my heart beating faster and faster. We were just talking about your father, and now your mind sees his likeness in a stranger. But Leighton shook his head. No, Mom. It's not just a resemblance. I have to check. Before I could stop him, Leighton got up and walked out into the hallway. I watched as he moved slowly forward, as if walking, but I knew he was trying to get a better look at the man. When he returned a few minutes later, his face was white as chalk. It's him, Leighton whispered, sinking back into his seat. I swear, Mom, it's Dad. And he's not alone. He's with some woman. I felt the room begin to spin. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Garrett was dead. I was at his funeral. I saw his car smashed to pieces at the bottom of the canyon. The police confirmed his identity. Leighton, you're wrong, I said, but my voice was shaking. It can't be him. It's just someone who looks like him. Mom, his voice became firmer. Mom, it's Dad, but with another woman. I know my father. I would recognize him anywhere. I closed my eyes, trying to collect my thoughts. This was ridiculous. It was a stupid thing to do. And yet, show me, I finally said, opening my eyes and looking directly at my son. Leighton nodded. We stood up together and walked slowly forward, as if heading to the restroom. As we passed the business class, I allowed myself to look to the left, at the row of seats by the window. And then I saw him. The world around me stopped. Garrett. My Garrett. Older than I remembered. Of course, it had been 11 years, but undoubtedly him. The same brown eyes, the same nose, the same jawline. He was sitting next to a younger woman with red hair, explaining something to her, showing her something in a magazine on the table. I felt the ground leave my feet and grabbed the back of the chair to keep from falling. Let's go back, he whispered in my ear. We need to think. But it was too late. The moment we turned around to go back to our seats, Garrett looked up and looked directly at us. At first, there was no recognition in his eyes, just a polite glance at the other passengers passing by. But then he looked again, and his face changed. Shock, fear, guilt. All of it flashed through his eyes in 1 second. Merritt, he whispered, and his voice, so familiar, so dear, a voice I hadn't heard in 11 years, was like a punch in the chest. The red-headed woman next to him noticed his reaction and turned to look at us. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she grabbed Garrett's arm as if seeking protection. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. But Leighton had no such problem. Dad, he said, his voice cold and hard as steel. It's interesting to see you here, especially considering you've been dead for 11 years. Garrett looked like he'd been hit. He looked around, clearly aware that this conversation was attracting the attention of other passengers. Please, he said quietly. Not here. Let's find a place where we can talk privately. Oh, now you want to talk? Leighton's voice rose. After making us think you were dead for 11 years? The stewardess came over to us, attracted by the noise. Is everything okay? She asked, looking from us to Garrett and back again. No, it's not, Leighton replied. But we'll work it out, won't we, Dad? He said the last word with such sarcasm that I flinched. Garrett looked sick. The red-headed woman next to him looked confused and scared. Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seats, the stewardess said, clearly feeling tense. If you have a problem, I can call the chief flight attendant. No need, Garrett said quickly. We just saw some old friends and were surprised. It's okay. Old friends? Leighton almost laughed. Is that what you're calling us now? Your family? Leighton, I finally found my voice. Not here. Let's go back to our seats. I pulled him by the arm, and to my surprise, he obeyed. But before he left, he leaned over to Garrett and said, "We'll talk. In Portland. And you will explain everything to us." Garrett just nodded, looking absolutely shattered. Returning to our seats, we sat in stunned silence. I could feel a storm of emotions raging inside me: shock, disbelief, anger, pain, embarrassment. How was this possible? How could Garrett have been alive all these years? "I can't believe it," Leighton whispered, looking straight ahead with a blank stare. "He's been alive all this time." I didn't know what to say. No words seemed sufficient for this moment. Instead, I just took his hand, and we sat there, connected by our shared shock and pain. After a while, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour, I lost track of time, a man came up to our row. Garrett. He stood there, shifting hesitantly from foot to foot, looking so familiar and yet so foreign. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly. Leighton looked up, and I saw such anger in his eyes, such pain that my heart clenched. "Now?" he replied. "After 11 years, you think you can just walk up and say, 'Hey, let's talk?'" "I know you have a lot of questions," Garrett said, his voice shaking. "And I owe you an explanation. I just, I didn't expect to see you here on this flight. It's, it's a shock to me." "Shock to you?" Leighton almost laughed. "What about us? What about your mother, who mourned you for 11 years? What about me, who grew up without a father, thinking you killed yourself?" Garrett flinched at the word killed, and I saw real pain in his eyes. But I couldn't find the compassion in me. "Not after everything we'd been through." "May I?" He pointed to the empty seat next to Leighton. My son didn't answer, just moved over, giving Garrett a place to sit. I noticed that a red-headed woman was watching us from business class, her face pale and tense. "Your new wife?" I asked, nodding in her direction. "Tamsin," Garrett replied. "And we're not married." "Of course," I said, the bitterness in my voice unavoidable. "Of course you've started a new life. While we—" "Mom," Leighton interrupted me, his voice firm. "Let's hear what he has to say. I want to hear him justify his disappearance and abandonment of his family." Garrett lowered his head, and I saw gray in his hair that had once been as dark as Leighton's. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. But it was definitely him. My husband. The father of my son. The man I had mourned for 11 years. "I don't know where to begin," he finally said. "With the truth," Leighton replied. "Start with the truth. Why you faked your death and left us." Garrett took a deep breath. "I was a senior accountant at Pharmatech, you remember," he began. "And I found some discrepancies in the numbers. Big discrepancies. The company was laundering money, hiding side effects of new drugs, bribing officials. I gathered evidence and thought about going to the authorities with it." He stuttered, looking at his hands. "But then I received a warning. An anonymous call. They knew what I had found, and they made it clear that if I talked, I wouldn't be the only one who would suffer. My family, you, would be in danger." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "And you decided the best way to protect us was to make us think you were dead?" I asked, my voice breaking on the last word. "I didn't see any other way," Garrett replied, tears in his eyes. "They were serious about their threats. I knew the only way to protect you was to disappear completely. If they thought I was dead, they'd leave you alone." "And it worked?" Leighton asked. Garrett nodded. "I changed my name, moved to Canada. I started a new life. And yes, they believed I was dead, at least for a while." "And then?" I pushed. "Then, the company went bankrupt a few years later. Another investigation not related to me, and I thought about going back. I really did. But you already had a new life," Leighton finished, his voice full of contempt. "A new woman. A new future." Garrett didn't argue. He just sat there, taking Leighton's wrath, looking utterly shattered. "I don't expect you to understand or forgive me," he finally said. "But I want you to know that I thought about you every day. Every day for 11 years. I've followed your progress, Leighton. I know about your work in IT, your marriage. I've even seen the pictures of your wedding, the ones in the local paper. You've been spying on us? Leighton looked even more angry. Instead of being present in our lives, you chose to be an invisible observer? I was trying to protect you, Garrett repeated. I knew my actions would hurt you, but I thought the pain of losing you was better than the danger you would have been in if I had stayed. I looked at him, trying to find the truth in his words. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to think that he was acting out of love, trying to protect us. But the other part, the bigger part, screamed that it was nonsense, an excuse, a lie. And what about your friend? I asked, nodding toward the red-haired woman. Before or after your death? Garrett looked me straight in the eye, and I saw something in his gaze that broke my heart to pieces. Guilt, unmixed with any excuses or explanations. Before, he said quietly. We worked together at Pharmatech. She was one of the people who helped me uncover the fraud, and she was in danger just like me. So you didn't just run away to protect us, I said, my heart sinking with every word. Garrett opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it, and the gesture told me everything I needed to know. Mom was right, Leighton said, his voice quiet but full of anger. All these years you've blamed your mom for not noticing your depression, for being too busy with her career to notice that you were suffering. But the truth is, there was no depression. You were just having an affair and looking for a way to get away from your family. It's not that simple, Garrett tried to explain. Yes, we had feelings for each other, but I would never have left you just because of that. The threat was real. Everything I said about the company, about the danger, was true. Maybe, Leighton replied, but you used that threat as an excuse to start a new life with the woman you loved more than your family. Garrett didn't know what to say to that. He just sat there, head down, looking like a man who had lost everything. Meanwhile, I was looking at him, and all my memories, all my feelings for this man I had loved for 33 years, were mixed with the bitterness and pain of betrayal. I thought about the years after his death, about loneliness, about the break with my son, about accusations and self-blame. What do you do now? I asked, not because I was curious, but just to fill the silence. I teach accounting at a community college, he replied, in Vancouver. It's nothing special, but I like it. I'm glad at least one of us has been happy for 11 years, I said, my bitterness so obvious that Garrett flinched. Merritt, he trailed off. I know what I did was unforgivable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. The truth? Leighton almost laughed. What truth? What you're telling us now? Or is it another lie? Another story you made up to justify your betrayal? Garrett looked as if Leighton had hit him. He stood up slowly. I understand your anger, he said, and I deserve it. I'll leave you now. But if you want to talk again, I'll be in Portland for a week. Tamsin and I will be staying at the Riverside Hotel, room 276. I'll be there if you want to know more. With that, he left, returning to his seat next to the red-haired woman who immediately leaned over to him, obviously asking what was wrong. Leighton and I sat in silence, each deep in thought. I could feel the tears building up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not here, not now. I wouldn't give Garrett the satisfaction of seeing me cry over him again. I don't believe a word he says, Leighton finally said. That story about the threats, about protecting us, it's all a lie to justify him running off with his mistress. I wanted to agree with him. Part of me really believed that Garrett was lying, that he was just looking for an excuse for his actions. But the other part of me, the part that had known him for 33 years, hesitated. I don't know, I said honestly. I just don't know what to think. What do you mean? Leighton turned to me, clearly surprised. You don't believe him, do you? I'm not saying I believe everything he said, I said carefully. But I knew your father for a long time, Leighton, and I don't think he's capable of such a cruel lie for no reason. Maybe the threat was real. Maybe he really thought he was protecting us. By protecting his mistress? Leighton's anger was now directed at me. Mom, he admitted to having an affair before he died. He admitted that he disappeared to be with her. I know, I closed my eyes, feeling the pain pierce through me. And it's unforgivable. But that doesn't mean everything else he said was a lie. Leighton shook his head, clearly disappointed by my reaction. I can't believe you're even considering excusing him. I'm not excusing him, Leighton, I replied, feeling the tears finally start to flow. For 11 years I thought your father killed himself because of depression that I didn't see coming. For 11 years I lived with this guilt. And now, finding out it was all a lie, I don't know what to feel. Leighton looked at me, and the anger in his eyes gradually changed to something else. Maybe understanding, maybe compassion. I know, he said more quietly. I know, Mom. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I blamed you all these years. I'm sorry I believed his lies. I took his hand, feeling tears streaming down my face. It wasn't your fault, I said. You were just a kid who lost his father. You were looking for someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. Leighton nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes as well. But now we know the truth, he said, and we have to decide what to do next. I nodded, wiping away my tears. What to do next? It was a question I didn't have an answer to. Should I meet Garrett again? Hear the full story? Or should I just leave it at that, forget about him, and move on with my life, just like he had 11 years ago? I don't know, I answered honestly. The rest of the flight was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything but thoughts of Garrett, his words, the woman next to him. I kept coming back to the moment I saw him, alive, healthy, aged, but still so familiar. My husband, whom I had mourned, whom I had loved, whom I had thought dead for 11 years. Leighton was also deep in thought, occasionally glancing forward to where Garrett was sitting. His face was tense, his eyebrows drawn together. I knew he was going through an internal struggle, just like me. As the plane began its descent to Portland, I felt a strange sensation, a mixture of fear, anger, embarrassment, and strangely enough, relief. Relief that Garrett was alive. That he didn't kill himself, as I had thought all these years. That my guilt, the guilt that had been my companion for 11 long years, was based on a lie. But this relief was mixed with a new pain, the pain of betrayal, deception, loss not through death, but through choice. And this pain was perhaps even more acute. Portland greeted us with a light rain. The drops drummed on the roof of the airport terminal, creating a melancholy melody that surprisingly matched our mood. We stood at the terminal exit waiting for a taxi, silent and exhausted. The incident on the plane had left us emotionally devastated, and neither of us knew what to say. I saw Garrett and Tamsin walk quickly past us to the taxi stand. Garrett gave us a look, a mixture of guilt, sadness, and some strange hope, but didn't approach us. Good. I wasn't ready for another conversation. Not when my mind was still trying to wrap its head around the fact that my husband was alive, that he had faked his death, that he had been living a new life with another woman for 11 years. Riverside Hotel, the taxi driver said when we finally got into the car. It was the same hotel Garrett had mentioned. A coincidence? I didn't believe it for a moment. Can we change hotels? Asked Leighton, obviously thinking the same thing. Sure, said the driver. There are plenty of good places downtown. We chose another hotel closer to the ocean. The distance from Garrett seemed necessary, like a physical barrier against the storm of emotions that threatened to engulf us both. Our room at the Ocean Breeze Hotel was simple but clean and comfortable, with a view of the Pacific Ocean we had come to see. Leighton put our suitcases down and walked over to the window, looking out at the gray mass of water stretching to the horizon. What are we going to do? He asked without turning around. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling tiredness seeping into every cell of my body. I don't know, I answered honestly. Leighton turned to me, his face serious. I think we need to get the truth, he said. The whole truth, not the version he told us on the plane. And how do you propose to do that? I asked. Go to his hotel? No. Leighton shook his head. I think we should do our own investigation. Check out his story. See if Pharmatech was really involved in some kind of fraud, if there were really threats, or if it was all a fabrication to justify his disappearance. I nodded. It made sense. Before we could meet with Garrett again, we needed to know what we were dealing with. Where do we start? I asked. The internet. Leighton pulled out his laptop. If there were any scandals involving Pharmatech, there must be some information online. We spent the next few hours researching the history of Pharmatech. Indeed, the company went bankrupt 8 years ago after a major scandal involving falsification of clinical trial results for one of their diabetes drugs. Several executives received prison sentences, and the company was bombarded with lawsuits from affected patients. So that part of his story is true, Leighton said, looking at the business magazine article. The company did engage in some questionable practices, but that doesn't prove that Garrett was really in danger, I replied, or that he faked his death to protect us, not to run away with his mistress. Leighton nodded, continuing his search. Then he suddenly stopped, staring at the screen. What? I asked, noticing a change in his face. Look, he turned the laptop to me. There was an article on the screen about the accident in which Garrett allegedly died. Pharmatech accountant killed in car accident, the headline read. But that wasn't what was interesting. There was a short paragraph at the end of the article. Farmington police say the circumstances of the crash are unclear. Although officially classified as a suicide based on a suicide note found, some details do not match that theory. The investigation is ongoing. Investigation, I whispered. I've never heard of any investigation. Because it was quickly closed, Leighton said, moving on to another article dated a week later. Investigation into death of Pharmatech accountant closed. The official cause is suicide. Closed too quickly, Leighton said, his voice sounding like a detective's excitement. We continued our search. Leighton found several more articles about Pharmatech and their questionable practices. One of them mentioned missing financial documents that could be key evidence in the case against the company. Do you think these were the documents Garrett collected? I asked. Maybe, Leighton replied, not looking up from the screen. Then he found something else, a list of Pharmatech employees who had testified against the company during the investigation. Among them was Tamsin Holloway, described as a former pharmacist in the research department. So that part is true too, Leighton said. We continued to dig deeper. We called the Farmington Police Department, posing as researchers writing a book on corporate fraud, and asked about Garrett's case. The officer we spoke to was not very helpful, but mentioned that the case was unusual and that there were some inconsistencies that were never fully explained. What kind of inconsistencies? Asked Leighton. I can't say for sure, the officer replied. It was a long time ago, but I do remember talking about how the car was too badly damaged to simply pull off the road, and there was something wrong with the suicide note. But the investigation was closed from above, so... He didn't finish his sentence, but we understood. Someone wanted the case to be closed as soon as possible. After the call, we sat in silence, thinking about everything we had learned. It seems like his story might be true, Leighton finally said, at least partially. Pharmatech was indeed engaged in fraud. Tamsin was indeed involved in uncovering it. But that still doesn't explain why he didn't come back to us when the danger was over, I replied. Why didn't he come home? Leighton nodded, recognizing the validity of my question. I think only he can answer that, he said. Tomorrow, I sighed, feeling tiredness and emotional exhaustion wash over me. I just can't do it today. Leighton nodded in understanding. He came and sat down next to me on the bed, allowing himself such close contact for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly, for everything, for blaming you all these years, for being so cruel. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. And I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the pain, that I couldn't be the mother you needed after what happened. We sat like that for a while, holding hands, united by our shared grief, and perhaps the beginnings of a new understanding. The next morning we called the Riverside Hotel and left a message for Garrett. We wanted to meet him, but on neutral ground, in a cafe near the waterfront. He came alone, without Tamsin. He looked tired but composed, as if he had been preparing for this meeting all night. Thank you for agreeing to meet, he said, sitting down at our table. We want to hear the whole truth, Leighton replied without preamble. We've done our own investigation and we know about Pharmatech, the scandal, Tamsin. But we want to hear from you why you didn't come back to us when the danger was over. I was afraid, he said simply. At first, I was really afraid for your safety. Pharmatech had connections to some very dangerous people, and the threats were real. But then, when the company collapsed and the threat disappeared, I was afraid of your reaction, your anger, your disappointment. You were right about that, Leighton said, his voice bitter. I know, Garrett looked down, and I deserve every drop of your anger, but that's not the only reason. He took a deep breath, as if to gather his composure. The truth is, I fell in love with Tamsin before I even discovered the Pharmatech fraud. We worked together on a big project, spent a lot of time together, and it just happened. I didn't plan for it, I didn't look for it, but you didn't stop it, I finished for him, feeling my heart clench with pain. I know it's unforgivable, he said, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know the whole truth. When I discovered the company's fraud and received the threats, part of me saw it as an opportunity, an opportunity to start a new life. A life in which I wouldn't be a traitor who left my family for another woman, but a hero who sacrificed himself to protect his loved ones. You used the threat as an excuse, Leighton said, his voice cold. Yes, Garrett admitted. Part of it. But the threat was real, Leighton. And I was really afraid for you. It's just that wasn't the only reason I made the decision. What happened then? I asked. After the danger passed? Tamsin and I had already made a new life in Vancouver. I changed my name, got new documents, started teaching, and he trailed off. I was happy. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Without the burden of a lie, without the feeling that I was living a double life. His words hit me like a physical blow. For all our 33 years of marriage, he felt like he was in prison. And you never thought about us? Leighton asked, and I could hear the pain behind the anger in his voice. About what we were going through. About how your mom blamed herself for your depression. About how I hated her for supposedly ignoring your suffering? Garrett shuddered, and I saw real pain in his eyes. I thought about you every day, he said quietly. Every day for 11 years. And I hated myself for what I did to you. But I couldn't bring myself to go back and confess. I was too weak, too selfish. And you would never have confessed if we hadn't met by chance on that plane, I said. And it wasn't a question. Probably not, he said after a pause. And that makes me a terrible person, I know. But I can't change the past. I can only tell the truth now. We sat in silence, each deep in our own thoughts. Garrett waited, not trying to justify himself further. Why did you fly to Portland? I finally asked. Tamsin has a sister here, he replied. We come once a year to visit her. It's another reminder of his new life, of the family he created without us. I can't forgive you, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Not for falling in love with someone else. These things happen. But for choosing the cruelest way to leave, by making us think you were dead. For letting us blame ourselves all these years. For ruining my relationship with my son. I know, he replied quietly. And I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth. We ended the meeting shortly afterward. Garrett left us his phone number saying he would be in Portland for 5 more days if we wanted to talk again. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. We got what we came for, the truth. And although it was painful, it was better than the lies we had been living for 11 years. Back at the hotel, Leighton and I talked for a long time. About Garrett, about the past, about our broken relationship. For the first time in years, we really opened up to each other, without blame, without resentment, just with a desire to understand and maybe start over. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him, Leighton said, looking out the window at the ocean. I'm not asking you to forgive him, I replied. I can't, but I think we need to let him go. Let go of the anger, the pain, all those emotions that have held us captive for 11 years. Not for his sake, but for our own. Leighton turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a very long time. Understanding, warmth, maybe even love. I want to try, he said quietly, for both of our sakes. We spent the next few days exploring Portland and its surroundings. We visited the forests, the waterfalls, the ocean. We talked a lot about everything that had happened during the years of our estrangement, about Sinead, who, as Leighton admitted, never really understood him, about my loneliness in Farmington, about Caden's attempts to control my life, about my work at a school I loved, but which was also a way to escape the emptiness of my home. I don't want to go back, Leighton said on our third day in Portland. We were sitting on the beach watching the waves. Not to Albuquerque, not to that job I hate, not to Sinead, with whom we have had nothing in common for a long time. Where do you want to go? I asked. Here, he gestured at the landscape around us. Or anywhere else on the coast. Somewhere I can start over. I looked at my son, and my heart filled with hope. I could move with you, I offered cautiously. If you don't mind. Sell the house in Farmington, buy something small here. Be closer to you. Leighton smiled, a real, open smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. I'd love that, he said. That night we began to plan our new life. Leighton called his boss and handed in his notice. Then, after a long pause, he called Sinead and told her he wasn't coming back. The conversation was short and, judging by his face, not very pleasant. But when he finished, he looked free, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I called a real estate agent in Farmington and asked him to appraise my house for sale. Then I called Caden and told him about my decision to move. He was outraged, of course, and tried to convince me that I was making a mistake, that I was too old for a fresh start, that I wouldn't be able to cope on my own in a new city. But this time his words had no power over me. I knew what I was doing, and I knew I was no longer alone. We found a small house to rent in a coastal town near Portland. Leighton started looking for work in IT companies in the region. I thought about volunteering at a local school, not to make money, but to feel needed, to be part of the community. On the 5th day of our stay in Portland, we received a message from Garrett. He and Tamsin were on their way back to Vancouver. He wrote that he understood our decision not to see him again, and that he respected that. He wished us happiness and asked only that we try to find peace, if not with him, then at least with each other. How do you feel? Leighton asked when I showed him the message. Relief, I answered honestly. Relief that he is out of our lives, this time by our own decision, not because of his deception. And gratitude. Gratitude? Leighton looked surprised. Not to him, I explained, but to fate, for being here with you, together, that we have a chance to start over. Leighton nodded in understanding. I feel the same way, he said. On the 7th day of our stay in Portland, the last day of our planned trip, we decided to visit Cannon Beach, one of the most beautiful places on the Oregon coast. It was a clear, sunny day, a rarity in these parts. The ocean sparkled like millions of diamonds under the sun. We walked along the shore, feeling the cold waves wash over our feet, and talked about the future, about what our new life would be like here, on this coast, about the small house we had already rented, the job Leighton was looking for, the volunteer work I was planning to do, about the new friends we would make, the new places we would visit, the new memories we would create. We didn't talk about the past, not about Garrett, not about the years of pain and alienation, not about the time we had lost. The past was behind us, and although it had shaped us, made us who we are, we decided not to give it power over our future. We stopped at a large rock that towered over the beach and sat down on the sand, looking out at the endless ocean. The sun began to slope toward the horizon, painting the sky and water in gold and red. Beautiful, isn't it? Said Leighton, looking at the sunset. It is, I agreed. And you know what's best? This is just the beginning. Tomorrow there will be a new sunrise, a new day, and we'll see it together. Leighton reached out and took my hand in his. We sat there, mother and son, united not only by blood, but by a common decision to leave the past behind and look forward to the ocean, to the sunset, to the new life that awaited us. By the way, Leighton said, smiling, I have already sent my application to 3 IT companies in Portland, and one of them has already invited me for an interview. That's great, I squeezed his hand. I'm so proud of you. And I'm proud of us, he replied, for choosing to live, not just exist. I nodded, feeling tears, this time tears of hope and joy, not pain, welling up in my eyes. A new life, I said. Without the past, Leighton finished. The sun touched the horizon, flooding the last bit of sky with light. And we sat there, looking forward, ready to face whatever the future would bring. Together.